Okay, now we have gone already through the Scrum team, the Scrum event, and we'll now go into the Scrum artifacts, and there are 3 of them. So the first one and most important, you already heard about it, the product backlog, which is your wish list of the product, where you have all the requirements from various stakeholders inside your product backlog. It's emergent, so meaning you can always have new ideas, new requirements coming into the product backlog at any time. Those new items may actually change the orders. So we strive to have an order with the product backlog with the most important item at the top and the least important one at the bottom. It is a single source of work undertaken by the Scrum team. So the Scrum team should not be taking any work which is not coming from the product backlog. And product backlog items which can be done in a sprint are considered to be ready for selection, meaning that if you have instead some product backlog item which you know you will not be able to complete in a sprint, then you will need to break down those product backlog items into smaller pieces. Attributes often vary with the domain of work. So depending if you work on again, HR, marketing, maybe you do, software or car manufacturing or jet fighter. Depending on the industry or function where you stand, then you will have different, attributes inside your product backlog item. But in general, you will see a title for a product backlog item, a description of it, potentially some indication regarding its size, maybe also some acceptance criteria, and so on. There is a commitment associated with the product backlog, and this is a product goal. So the product goal describes a future state of the product, and this serves as a target, as a North Star for the Scrum team to plan against. So it should be clear to the Scrum team what we want to achieve with the product. And by having this product goal, this helps actually the team it guides the team in how to conduct the work or which work also need to be undertaken. And of course, this is associated with a product backlog because it's unlikely that you work on items which have nothing to do with your product backlog, with your product goal, sorry. Okay, now let's go to the second artifact, which is a sprint backlog. By now, you understand that the sprint backlog is actually selected items from the product backlog for a given sprint. The sprint backlog is composed of the sprint goal, so why we want to do this sprint or what we want to achieve during the sprint, the items which are being selected for the sprint, and a plan on how to deliver, the increment. So how to turn those items, product backlog items, into a working increment. The sprint backlog is a plan by and for the developer, and this is updated, during the sprint. So you could have, new elements which come in your plan. So you are not really talking about the scope. In general, the scope, let's say, will be mostly fixed at the sprint planning time, but maybe the different items which compose a product backlog item. So the different tasks which need to be achieved in order to complete a sprint backlog item, this may vary during the course of the sprint because you may realize that there are new elements, new things which you need to develop, which you didn't take into account. The sprint backlog is associated with the sprint goal. So, as a commitment, and the sprint goal is a single objective for the sprint. And this helps the developer actually to focus on the work which need to be done to complete the sprint. Last but not least, in terms of official artifact in Scrum, you have the increment. An increment is a concrete stepping stone towards a product goal. Every increment that the team is doing should be additive to all previous increments. And it needs to have been tested and verified to make sure that all increments can work together. So anything produced by the team should be able to work with what was previously developed. And work cannot be considered part of an increment unless it meets the definition of done. So we talked briefly about definition of done before. The definition of done is a description of the state of the increment, and it contains actually quality measure, so quality criteria which you want to have for the product. So what does it mean, in practice? So let's take the example of software development. In software development, you will normally have coding convention. So coding convention will be the way of writing the code that you will want maybe some use of capital letters, in some function as an example, or you will name your variable in a specific way. So you will say that for any piece of software, you want to make sure that coding convention are followed, that the code is reviewed by a peer, and that it's stored in a central place, as an example. So this would be part of the criteria which you have in your definition of done. So this means that when an increment or when you want to have an item considered done, you will need to check your definition of done. If the criteria of the definition of done are met, and the scope for your item it's considered also, done by the product owner, then here you have an increment. Having a definition of done setup ensure that there is transparency in the team, so within the team and outside of the team, so that everyone have a shared understanding of what it means to have an item considered done. So you don't have different developers applying different quality criteria to make sure that their items are actually done. No, it's kind of one common definition for everyone.